Okay. I think I did it. Okay.
I think so.
All right. So this is my friend Rory, and it is so good to see you, and even over Zoom. And Rory has agreed to talk about some of the feasts. And again, I say Leviticus 23, but is it by scroll, or is it by, how do you identify Leviticus? We can edit this part out.
No, yeah, that's fine. Leviticus is fine. I mean, we would use the Hebrew, which is Vayikra.
Okay.
And we tend to talk about it more by the Torah portion. So I believe that it's Parshat Emor, which actually, interestingly enough, this you'll just like appreciate that we rescheduled and stuff, but it was actually the Torah portion we just read last week. So like this is a very timely.
Perfect.
Because we go through it in order. So this was like just what we had recently read. So yeah, we would say that this was what we would say Parshat Emor. And they're called by like usually kind of like the first word of the portion.
Okay.
So Emor means speak. So
Okay.
Presumably, I guess God was saying to Moses to speak to the people. I haven't looked at it, but I assume it was something like that.
The Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, these are the appointed feasts.
So usually like we'll do, it'll be like the first recognizable word of the portion. So like if it starts with like the Lord spoke to Moses saying, like we don't call the portion that.
Yeah.
So that would be that's how we would call this section.
Awesome. Okay. Well, and this is this chapter, this portion has 7 feasts or holy convocations and appointed feasts. And so we're going to take the next few minutes for you and I, but then we'll try to divide this up so that each week people can get a feel for what these are. And we talked about 3 questions: what these are, the origins, how did this come to be? And that, again, there might be a specific origin. Obviously, even Shabbat it's rooted in creation, it's rooted in the commandments. So there's a whole lot that is there, but if there's a specific origin, what is important? What's the point of why you celebrate, why you remember? What is the call there? And then the last part is, how do you celebrate? What's something that you do or have done either as a child or that you do with your family now, and how you remember and celebrate? Sound good?
Sounds good. Yeah.
All right. So we'll start with the Sabbath or Shabbat. 6 days shall work be done, but on the 7th day is a Sabbath. And then a recurring theme in here, a solemn rest, a holy convocation. So the origins of Shabbat.
Yeah, so Shabbat, it's really interesting because we talk about 2 foundations for Shabbat. The first being creation. So most famously, God creates the world in 6 days and God rests on the 7th day. But that's actually not where we first get Shabbat, because we don't seem to have a practice of the 7th day of rest until we get into the story in the book of Exodus, when God commands the people to build the tabernacle for God in the desert. And then God says, but still keep the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Well, so we have Shabbat introduced, but we have it sort of like reiterated and emphasized there. And so in our rabbinic tradition, the rabbis kind of understand when we think about like what we don't do on Shabbat, like what does it mean to rest? What do we rest from? So if we're going to look at creation, then that's kind of hard to imagine. Like, what does it look like for God to create, for us to then emulate what it is for God to rest?
Mm-hmm.
And so the rabbis draw this really beautiful comparison where they say God created a world for us. And when we build the tabernacle, or now you can even extrapolate it to building houses for us to worship God, we build a house for God to live in, so to speak, right?
Sure.
It says, and they shall build me a sanctuary and I will rest or reside in it. And so when we rest from what it was for us to create a world for God. The language is clunky, obviously, because God exists without our space, right? But that, in a sense, like we become like partners of God in creation throughout the week. And then there's this one day where we stop from creating in all the ways that we create in the world, all the ways that we try to fix the world or make the world better or make the world different. We cease, and in doing that, we take a moment to actually appreciate the world as it is.
Okay. And that is the first day of the week.
Yeah, no,
Which
so
is
it's the last day of the week.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we Sunday is the first day of the week.
Okay. So for us, in a Christian calendar, our Sabbath would be Sunday.
Right, which you would also say is the first day. Yeah. So I mean,
Right.
in Hebrew, Sunday is literally, it's Yom Rishon, the first day, and Monday is the second day, and Tuesday is the third day, and so you get up to the sixth day, and then Shabbat.
Yeah, but it does start at sundown, where the next day actually starts at sundown, right?
Yeah. So because in the creation story it says, and it was evening and it was day one, or it was evening and it was day two, we count days starting at evening.
Okay.
So we start celebrating Shabbat from nightfall on Friday night until I was going to say nightfall on Saturday night, but the truth is that we're not totally sure when night even is. This is like how the rabbis kind of get into all of it. So we actually do it from the beginning of sundown on Friday night until when the stars come out on Saturday night, just to like be totally sure that we have encompassed the full day. So we actually do, for those of us who celebrate Shabbat in that kind of timing way, we do 25 hours.
Okay. Just in case.
Yeah, just in case.
Okay.
Just in case we don't want to like accidentally work with Shabbat. So there's, in general, every day the rabbis have this period. You could decide to cut this out or use it, whatever you want. But they call it like between the suns. It's this like ambiguous period when we're not totally sure what day it is. So from like dusk until nightfall, whatever we kind of call all those terms, there's this sort of hour-long period that the rabbis are like not completely certain. And so like we won't do weddings during that time. Things sometimes get confusing if a baby is born during that time. Like if there's like certain things where we need to be able to, like for a wedding contract, we say like on this day. So I've been to many a wedding when the wedding would be called for like, I don't know, 7:00, and there would be like a cocktail hour first or something. And then it would be time for the ceremony. And then the rabbi would realize, oh, we're actually in this in between time. So we're just going to do another like half hour more of cocktail hour. And we're going to just like push the wedding back a little bit so that we like totally know with confidence what day it is.
That's amazing.
Also, I mean, I don't know why no one figured that out like before they printed the invitation.
But before they started the wedding, yeah. But
like you can, I can look up now when the sun is going to set, you know, October 2nd, 2025, like right now if I wanted to.
Right.
So
that's not a good foundation to start your marriage on if you're not planning that well. No, that is fascinating. And you kind of already talked about a little bit about the point of Shabbat, but if there's anything else that you want to, is there anything else that you like as far, I mean, the origin kind of contains the point in there. It is the cease from labor to appreciate creation as it is. And
yeah, you know, I think like there's a certain sense we feel of rejuvenation, right? Like what it is to like need to stop and reflect, to separate from the things that you're working on. But I think like it's not only just like appreciating creation, but there's this sort of, I don't know if dichotomy is quite the right word, but it's like we spend all week realizing ways that the world is imperfect and that we need to be improving upon it. And I mean that really from the most mundane to the highest level. So that could mean like, you know, I mean, I'm just thinking about like, I know this is going to be played later, right? But like we just had horrible tragedy of the shooting yesterday in Texas, right? And whenever you play this, there might have been another tragedy, right? Like, I mean, so like the ways in which we can look and say that there's something deeply broken in our world, that these lives can be so senselessly taken so easily. And we need to fix that, right? Like I mean in that, and I also mean it in the sense that like you can look at your garden and say, this isn't how I want it to look. I need more flowers, right? Like, so when I say that the world is not as it should be, I mean it on every level. And so like you just deciding I'm going to garden is you saying I'm going to somehow participate in the world. And then for one day when we stop, we appreciate creation, but we also appreciate what is good in the world. Like, so it's like, I'm not going to garden today and I'm just going to appreciate how beautiful this garden is. And I'm not going to whatever else it is that you're working on. But in that moment, I'm going to say, you know what, the world also has some perfection in it right now, and I'm just going to live with it.
Gratitude. Yeah. Appreciate that. So how do you, and you've talked a little bit about this, but we have gotten to participate, at least very briefly, but having a meal with you and your family. What are the elements of a celebration, a Shabbat day, 25 hours in the life of?
Yeah. So Shabbat tends to have kind of two categories, and actually this will apply to all the rest of the holidays as well, in many ways. So there's things that we don't do, and there's things that we do. And so the things that we don't do are all of the ways that the rabbis have identified is participating in the world, in creation, that we no longer do. And so there's a specific set of categories that includes things like, a lot of these are things that I don't even necessarily know what they all mean, right? So like hoeing the ground and reaping and winnowing and, you know, all of these things that are tied in some ways to the building of the tabernacle. That was all, there was bread in the tabernacle. So all the ways that they prepared the ground and grew the wheat and then separated the wheat from the chaff and then ground the wheat and all of those kinds of things. So we don't do. So what that means, because I'm not a farmer, what that really means for me on a practical level, and I want to be clear, what my practice is not true for all Jews. Like, sure. I think that's hopefully very clear. I don't change electricity on Shabbat. So if a light is on, I don't sit in the darkness, like the light will be on, but I don't turn lights on and off or use my phone or use my computer. I won't drive in a car. I won't use money, so I won't purchase anything. And what else? I won't write. I won't use a pen. I won't, we won't cook any food. So we'll reheat using an electric warmer that's already on existing food, or we'll eat cold food. Okay. But we won't cook any new food. And then other things like I was saying, we won't like grind or like squeeze a liquid from a solid. So like if suddenly, I mean, which is always interesting because you don't always think of it like work, but like if you were over and we suddenly said, hey, wouldn't lemonade be really great on a warm day like today? I won't squeeze lemons. Like if I don't have the lemonade already made, then we won't do any of that. So there's all those things that we don't do, but we then try to fill up that time that I'm not spending checking my email or writing something or all the other things that usually keep me busy. So we try to really fill it with time with family and friends. So we'll try to have, we will have at least 2 meals, dinner on Friday night and lunch on Saturday afternoon, where we will have, like, we'll have special blessings to sanctify the day. And we'll try to have like extra good food. We'll usually try to have guests over and have a more enjoyable time. We might sing songs. We might have like extra dessert. We might, sometimes lunch can go for hours because we have nothing else to do, but enjoy a bottle of wine and, you know, time with friends and whatever it might be. We might play family games. Services are longer on Saturday morning, so they could go for 3 hours because, again, like we don't really have as much to do. So we'll have extra prayers for Sabbath. And it really just tries to be a time that we really devote to family and to community.
That's awesome. And the idea that is cleared out and it's not, you don't have better places to be or other places to be. And that's on a weekly basis. The plan is to take more time with everything.
Yeah. And, you know, I mean, like sometimes you can make plans, right? So
sure.
If you and I mean, I wouldn't go somewhere that I would need to drive, but, you know, if you lived in walking distance, you might say, you know, come over at 3 o'clock or whatever it is. You know, now there's somebody who organizes like a Frisbee game in the park at 3 o'clock on Saturdays. And we've sometimes just invited people to meet up at 4 o'clock for, you know, snacks and drinks or whatever it might be. So we'll do things like that. But because the whole culture is one where we're not checking our phones or things like that, you know, so if we have guests over and we said, okay, we're going to meet at the park at 3, and lunch is just going later than we thought, and we're running a little bit late, like we don't stress because everyone kind of knows. So no one's expecting a phone call. I can't text anyone. So I might say, okay, we got to get going. But, you know, this happened a couple of weeks ago, and we probably got there at like 3:15, and the person who organized it didn't get there till 3:45. And it's just like, cool, we're just chilling,
Just
so
do it.
there's not this sense of pressure of like, like I feel like now during the week, like I would text you to be like, I'm running 2 minutes late, and it's just like you get there when you get there. And because we all participate in that, we all know.
Right.
So I've had that sometimes where I invite someone over for lunch and they don't come. And so we'll wait until maybe 1 o'clock and they didn't come. And we'll check on them when Shabbat is over. But, who knows? They didn't feel well that morning. They got caught up somewhere else.
There's a general
whatever,
understanding
right?
that,
their dog got sick, right? Like whatever it is. And so you're just kind of like, okay, we'll check to just make sure they're okay. We don't want to totally ignore it. But, there's something about that also in our culture where it's like you're expected to be at a certain place at any given time. And if you're not, like, there's all this stress. And there's something really beautiful also about like, yeah, sometimes there's nowhere better to be. Sometimes there is someplace I need to be. And everyone also knows that if I'm not there, they'll figure it out.
Yeah. That's great. I really like that. All right. Well, that's perfect. I love this. I love the discussion on Sabbath, and we'll kind of close that down. We'll have a little gap in the recording here, but and then move to Passover. But yeah, that's great. I love that whole, and as a communal feel, just how much more that is a part of that there's a general understanding there. It's not, you're not celebrating this on your own, which is really cool. Okay. You ready to move to Passover?
Passover.
Okay. Passover. All right. So the second one, after the Sabbath, the second appointed feast or holy convocation is Passover, the appointed feast of the Lord, holy convocation, which you shall proclaim at the time appointed for them in the first month on the 14th day of the month at twilight is the Lord's Passover. And then on the 15th day of the month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Help us understand the origins of Passover. Obviously, that's a fairly well-known story in Scripture, but
yeah. So I think it's first important, like you mentioned, so there's actually two things that the Bible talks about, although in modern day, we don't really talk about them as two separate holidays in the way that the practice has evolved. But both of them trace back to the story of the Exodus from Egypt, which is probably like the single most important story that we have in the Bible.
Sure.
And Passover is probably the most celebrated holiday in the Jewish calendar.
Okay.
I believe there's actual statistics on that, and I'm not just making that up. And so, it goes back to the origin, the date on the calendar is the date at which the people left Egypt, that God took the people out of Egypt. So we all know the story of the Israelites' enslavement in the land of ancient Egypt, and God sends Moses. Pharaoh refuses to let the people go. God brings great miracles and the plagues, and then at midnight, in the middle of the night, the people leave from Egypt and then begin their trek through the desert. 1 week long, really, until on the seventh day is when they reach the Sea of Reeds, and then the sea is split. And we like to talk about that in the moment, when they first leave Egypt is not really totally the moment of freedom, because slavery is still something that is a recent memory and their oppressors are chasing after them. And it's really when they see the sea and this climactic moment of seeing destruction chasing after them from behind, thinking that there's death in front of them with the sea. God miraculously splits the sea. The people walk through on dry land, turn around and see the Egyptians chase them into the sea, and then the sea crash down over them, and they see their oppressors die, is really the moment, and which says something really profound, not so much about the death part, but about like what it is to escape from suffering, and what it is to really need to see, and not just taking yourself out of a situation, but for the people to actually see that situation was no longer going to be chasing after them.
Mm.
And so so we mark the first day of Passover, and the what the Bible talks about is the Passover offering. So that was what God commands the people in Egypt to um, to make a sacrifice to God, to take the blood and to put the blood on their doorposts. And then that night is the plague of the firstborn. The people who put the blood on their doorposts get skipped over, and that's when Pharaoh tells the people to go. And so we first on the 14th commemorate that sacrifice with the Passover sacrifice. I say that, but we no longer do that. That's something we used to do when we had a temple in Jerusalem. With the destruction of the temple, there's no longer the Passover sacrifice. And then we have the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So we have a week where we do not eat any leavened bread, to commemorate that was the food that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt, or in some stories as they were leaving the land of Egypt.
And that is because there were the commandment from God, don't even give the bread time to rise. That
Yeah, so there's a lot of people who kind of question like some of that in terms of because the people actually do get notice from God that they're going to be going, and so like
right.
there is time to pack up. So there's some who actually say like it's more supposed to be symbols, like so we say often like this is the bread of oppression, right? Like this is
Okay.
that it's supposed to kind of commemorate the suffering and things like that,
Sure.
that our ancestors ate, and so we say like it's that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. So that's kind of like the cute story we sometimes tell over, but then some people kind of challenge that. But yeah, it all sort of connects somehow, that like this matzah, this flat unleavened bread, which I'll say that, excuse me, we're very strict about how that's made. So it is flour and water, no other ingredients whatsoever. It is baked at an incredibly high temperature for exactly 18 minutes, no more than that. And so goes through a very rigorous process, which is also why if you eat it, there's no salt in it, there's no extra taste to it. Like it is just very dry cracker.
Yeah. Okay. And there's a lot, I believe, with the celebration. This would be the Seder meal, correct? That is part of remembering the point of the deliverance out of Egypt and the freedom from slavery and oppression. I don't know so I'm asking that in a way that like maybe combines those two last questions. What's the point? And then how do you celebrate? But
yeah, so let me first like take a little bit of like a step back to say that
yes.
A couple of things. First of all the holidays that we're going to talk about, and maybe I should have said this before, but you'll figure out like however you want to incorporate it. All the holidays that we're about to talk about are in some ways like there is like a similarity to Shabbat. So all the same things that we don't do on Shabbat, we don't do on any of the holidays, and many of the things that we do, like making the blessing over grape juice or wine, having bread, or in this case matzah, things that kind of signify it as like a celebratory meal, all those things are the same. If you want to really get into details, the rabbis say there's 39 things that we're not allowed to do, 39 categories of things we're not allowed to do on Shabbat. 2 of them we are allowed to do on holidays. One is cooking and one is carrying. So we usually don't carry out in public places, and we don't cook, but we are allowed to cook on holidays. I'm getting into the weeds on some of that stuff. Okay, the other thing that's like sort of fascinating is that it says in the Bible for 7 days is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, I believe. But actually many of us keep 8 days. And this is just like, you could decide to use this or edit all this out. I don't know how much like you want to get into all of this stuff. But when there was like a very elaborate process of determining when the new moon was, like with witnesses going to testify before the courts. So we're obviously talking about the 15th of the month, but there were places that people could not be reached by the witnesses, by messengers. The Talmud, our oral tradition, recounts that it used to be that when the witnesses would come and say there was a new moon, they would light a fire at the temple, and then somewhere nearby they would see the fire lit, and they would light a fire, and so like fires would be lit, and word would get very quickly, okay, today is the 1st of the month, and then you'd start your calendar and you know when the 15th is. But that then at some point there were other groups that came in and were, whether they had conquered parts of the land or whatever it was, they started to mess with it, and they would light fires on random days, and so that system no longer worked. They had to send messengers out, and any place where the messengers could not reach within 2 weeks would celebrate an extra day. So like you and I here in America would be like, okay, today is either if last night was the first, then like today is the first of the month, but maybe the witnesses didn't come and today's actually the last day of the last month and tomorrow is the first. And so we would like keep today, like today would be the 30th or the 1st, and tomorrow would be the 1st or the 2nd, and then it would be the 2nd or the 3rd, and so on and so forth. So we would add an extra day. And so in Israel, where they were near the temple, there's 7 days of holiday. In America, we have 8 days. So we do the first night, we do the Seder. And actually, I do 2 Seders for exactly that reason. So really the commandment is to do 1 Seder, but we do it twice because at this point, we've set up a calendar. We know what day it is, but we just do it because it's what our ancestors always did. So we do 2 Seders. So we do the exact same Seder twice. And the interesting thing about the Seder, if you attend one, is that it is incredibly experiential. There's foods that you eat. They're supposed to evoke feelings. So there's the matzah. We eat salty, like we dip things in salt water, and that's supposed to commemorate tears. We eat bitter herbs that are supposed to feel, bitter and spicy, and to commemorate like the bitter suffering of the people. So it's like very experiential in that way. If you do the ritual of the Seder that the rabbis have set out, it spends a lot of time talking about the Exodus, but actually very little time talking about the Exodus, which is like a fascinating conundrum that the rabbis have created for us.
That's interesting. Okay, so the Seder is the primary, and I think when we do this, we're going to try to have some of those elements available to talk about the, like you said, the bitter herbs and the salt water and the hiroset and all of that stuff, and of course the matzah, the tasty matzah bread. Is there? So the Seder is the high point. That is the primary way. And then you said, and again, a lot of these are going to have cease from labor.
So the Seder would be like the really big ritual item that we would do, but then like for lunch the next day, it would look not so dissimilar from what a Shabbat lunch would look like. Okay. Other than we would not have challah, the really good braided bread, but we would have matzah instead of challah. But we also, the preparation for Passover is really rigorous. So people will do it differently, but like we not only, so we believe that there's a prohibition not just to eat any leavened items, but to own any leavened items. And so we will like eliminate all of it from our house. We do have, there is like some workarounds where there's this idea that like if we sell it, so like I will have, but like what I'll do is like if I have an unopened something, like I might put that in the garage and like designate it separately. But like I'll often talk to my kids where like I will only sell something that conceivably somebody would buy. So like I might, if I say to you like, hey, I have this unopened box of Oreos, like, do you want to give me $3 for it? Like you might be like, yeah, like I could take Oreos off your hand. But if I'm like, hey, I have this like half-eaten box of Oreos with like 4 left in it, do you want it? You'd be like, no, that's weird. Yeah. So like, we will like eat or get rid of or give away like whatever leavened items. I will actually not use any of my pots and pans. I have like a different set of pots and pans for Passover, or there's a process by which we could kosher to make kosher. So I will like boil a big pot of water and then put all my metal silverware in it. And only then will I use my silverware for Passover stuff. So like we will have like where we will like scrub the kitchen down, pour boiling water on things to like re-clean the whole oven, like a whole bunch of stuff. And then throughout Passover, we will not use anything with flour. Any kind of wheat product won't be included in anything. And then for some of us, like my family, where we trace our origins to Eastern Europe, in Eastern Europe, the wheat was grown with certain other crops that would sometimes get mixed together. And so because of it, there's this category of food that's like not forbidden, but we won't eat it on Passover because there was fear that it would get mixed with the wheat. So not only will I not eat any product with flour, I won't eat any product with corn or rice or soy. And there's probably a couple of other things on there. And so what that means is that there's a lot of potato and like potato starch. We'll use like, so we'll sometimes get creative like with dessert. So we'll make things with like almond flour, or there's like matzah meal. People will take matzah and then like what we described them doing, and then they'll grind the matzah into really fine pieces to kind of look like flour again. And then we'll use that. So if you're going to make like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like what an English equivalent of like some of this foods would be. But like if you need like something to kind of bind, you're making like a casserole kind of thing or something like that. Like we might use matzo meal or potato starch or different things. So the food would look a little bit different because a lot of the things like where normally during the week I might just make like a corn salad or, so we wouldn't have any of those. But, we would like, we try really on holidays to have food that's different than the food we would have during the week. So, we might have like, we might roast meat or chicken, or like things. And, but yeah, otherwise, like the rest of the time would kind of look similar to Shabbat, where we'd be spending time with family, trying to have really good meals and good food. And then we would also go to services. So if Passover is on, a Tuesday and Wednesday, if it starts, like I would not go to work those days. We would spend the morning at prayers, and during the services we would have like extra prayers about Passover. We would read the Torah portion that we're talking about now that would describe the commandments about Passover, and then we'd go back home and have a meal with friends and family.
Very cool. That's good. This is I'm even as you're talking and as I've been reading, there's a lot of similarities even in the commands that are given, but it's always interesting to hear like what that looks like lived out. So that's interesting. All right. We'll move on to the next one. And I'm trying to mark at least a little bit on where we're at time wise so that I could go back in and put some of the breaks in rather than putting put a red thing up here so I can see where those are and we can hit pause. So this next feast is I believe the first of 3 first fruits. Is that correct? I don't want to throw you off in anything but also it's the one, I will say this, it's the one that I don't understand. I get the point of it, but I'm not sure if there's anything actually done on it. So I'm really curious to hear about this. The Feast of First Fruits, which is it is, let's see, this is, you shall come into the land, when you come into the land that I give you and reap its harvest, and you shall bring the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest, and he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord so that you may be accepted. And on the day after Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. And on that day, when you wave the sheaf, you shall offer a male lamb, which is also fairly common. But you said the lambs were all affiliated with the temple.
Yeah, we don't do any of those sacrifices now.
And without blemish, burnt offering to the Lord, grain offering, 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour, and then the drink offering with wine. The food offering is a pleasing aroma. So this is my belief. I think this is like the feast in preparation for the harvest or the planting of.
So all the Jewish holidays kind of like overlap with agricultural holidays.
Sure, which totally makes sense.
They're not necessarily like, we don't always think of them as agricultural holidays, but like there's certainly, and so, which is also, the Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar that adjusts for the solar calendar, unlike like the Muslim calendar is a lunar calendar that does not adjust. So a lunar calendar is 354 days, a solar calendar, as you know, it's 365 days. So we'll keep shifting 11 days earlier, but unlike the Muslim calendar that will keep going earlier, every 2 or 3 years, we'll add a month of 29 or 30 days. So we'll kind of like shift, which is also why you'll sometimes see like Passover could be like at the end of March to the end of April, right?
Okay.
And it'll adjust. But we adjust for the solar calendar because of the agricultural significance. So Passover always will be in the spring, and immediately following on the second day of Passover. So after the first day of Passover, which is how we understand the portion you just read, like the day after the Sabbath, we don't understand it to mean Sabbath. We understand it to mean like the first day of rest that was the first day of celebration, a feast that was Passover.
Okay.
We start counting what we call the Omer, which had been this offering. So that's actually the period we're in right now. We're counting the Omer. If I was doing a good job, I would tell you right now what day we're up to, and I don't remember offhand. We're probably somewhere in the late 30s right now. So I mean, the origin seems to be right. Like this is like the Bible just kind of telling us, and the ways in which like it's supposed to be like building up. There's certain commands that we have around first fruits, around offerings that are brought. All of those only exist in Israel, and some of them only exist with the temple. So there's some things that we do still practice in Israel, but we don't do if you grow things outside of Israel. And there's some things that we only consider to be binding during the temple. Most of us tend to think of the Omer not so much as the agricultural offering, but it's actually accounting. So we start counting from the day after our ancestors left Egypt. We count 7 weeks, so 7 groups of 7. We go up to 49, and then the 50th day is the holiday of Shavuot, which commemorates the giving of the Torah.
Right. Okay.
So all of this that you're talking about is the period in between.
Okay. So the Feast of First Fruits, and then which is correlates with the Feast of Weeks. It's the kind of the kickoff.
So we wouldn't call it the Feast of First Fruits. Like we would just, so okay. we call it counting the Omer.
Counting the Omer. Okay.
Like the barley offering that was brought.
Yes.
We don't consider it to be a feast. Like we don't really consider it to be a holiday. It is something though that we do with a blessing. So nowadays, people who are counting the Omer will count with a blessing every night. So at sundown, they will say the blessing, and then they'll say, today is the X day of, right? So like we'll say, today is day 1 of the Omer. And we'll say today's day 2. And then once you get to 7, you'll say like, today is day 7 of the Omer, which is 1 week of the Omer. And then you'll say today is day 8 of the Omer, which is 1 week and 1 day of the Omer. So we kind of have like the formula that we'll do. You could do it in any language, but people will often do it in Hebrew. It's like kind of like a fun, it's just like a fun fact about it. If you forget at night and you remember during the day, you will count, but without a blessing. And then that night you'll pick up again with a blessing. If you miss a day, you no longer can count with a blessing. So you can continue counting, but you wouldn't say the blessing first. And because you can count in any language, like if I want to remind you, if I'm like, okay, don't forget to count the Omer, I'll never say to you, don't forget to count the Omer, we're up to day 34, because then I've just counted and I didn't say the blessing on it. So what you'll often do is people will say, don't forget to count the Omer, last night was 33.
Okay.
So they'll say what it was. So you have to kind of like do a little bit of math on that. So that's just like fun facts about how we do it. But there's no like celebration. We don't have like meals. So that's the practice of it, like the commandment to count the Omer. But we don't have any, and there's no like prohibitions of like work or anything like that we'll usually have. So we don't consider that to be one of the holidays that we usually count. So
it really is just kind of this is when you start counting the Omer, but there's not an official launch to that. It's like celebratory or holiday, but it is just kind of that. Yeah.
There's some things that people later on additions, there were some things that people kind of like added. So part of this idea was that it's supposed to be a time of like kind of preparation. So the idea that like for these 49 days, the people were preparing themselves to receive the Torah. And so it should be like a time of self-reflection. Later on in the tradition, it became known as a time that later in the tradition, like during like the beginning of, like the turn of the what do you call it, like in like the first century. There was a famous rabbi who, the story goes that he had 14,000 students who died. And they say that they died because they did not treat each other with respect. And so there's some who have kind of taken on some like mourning practices during it. So for some people during this time, they won't play live music. We might not have weddings, and they like won't cut their hair. So we'll also sometimes talk about that. But yeah, there's not, I wouldn't call it a holiday.
Okay. So then the Feast of Weeks is, because these obviously these are very, very interconnected. The Feast of Weeks is.
Yeah, so the Feast of Weeks is really interesting because it's the only one that the Bible doesn't give us a date for. We just know that it's the 50th day after Passover, which is why we do the counting. Okay.
And that is, we can go ahead and move into that. Or is that, I mean, we'll go ahead and move into the Feast of Weeks. Because that, even like breaking these down, I'm still not quite sure how we're going to do that. But I think this might be shown on, we'll have to do some creative editing here. I think it's going to be like July 3rd. So right before America's Feast of Weeks, or whatever. And the Feast of Weeks is the giving of the Torah.
Yeah.
And so, the origins of that, it's celebratory.
So we do it. So we say that on the 50th day after the people left Egypt is when they reached Mount Sinai and received the Torah. And so we celebrate Shavuot to commemorate, we call it Shavuot in Hebrew, which means weeks. So the Feast of Weeks, to commemorate when we received the Torah at Sinai. Again, like kind of what I said before, so biblically it's one day. We celebrate it as 2 days outside of the land of Israel. It's actually coming up in just a few weeks now. And for the most part, it would look pretty similar to, again, kind of like to Shabbat. And there's not like a particular commandment differently on Shavuot. So we would cease doing work. I'll turn off my phone. I won't be writing. I won't be participating in creation anyway. And then we would have festive meals and extra good food. And we would have extra prayers at services. There are traditionally a few things that we do on Shavuot. So the two, I think it's two. I'm thinking if there's anything else I'm forgetting, but there's like two really major customs on Shavuot. One is that we don't eat meat and we eat dairy. And the idea of this was that the people were so nervous about all of the dietary laws that were given in the Torah, and they were so afraid of messing it up that they just like didn't sacrifice, they didn't bring any animals, because there was like so much about, most of the dietary rules are about animals, or around meat, right. what animals you're allowed to, how you kill the animals. So so we have a custom to eat dairy on Shavuot. And the second is that there's a story that the people, the night before they were going to be receiving the Torah, fell asleep, like they went to sleep, and that it was not considered a good thing because they should have been like so excited that they couldn't even sleep. And so we'll do what we call a tikkun leil Shavuot. Tikkun means fixing, like to fix the night of Shavuot. And so many people will have the custom to stay up all night studying Torah on Shavuot.
Okay. So I read about that, and I was curious if that is something that you said many people. Is that something that you do, that you guys practice as a family?
Yeah, so we've done it differently at different times. Sometimes we've done it like at home. We used to do it, my husband and I, where we would like invite friends over and we would like all kind of study together. The way that it tends to come up in the synagogue is that oftentimes like synagogues will organize things. So like what we'll do here in this congregation is that they'll have different teachers. And so they'll set up a schedule. So starting at like 10 o'clock, so it'll be like 10 to 11 will be one class. And then, maybe there'll be a 15-minute break, and then 11:15 to 12:15 will be another class, and then there'll be a 15 break, 12:30 to 1:30. And so we'll go until about 5 or 6 a.m. And they'll sometimes have multiple people. So we'll actually work with other congregations. So we'll have like all the different rabbis and lay leaders, volunteers. So you might have like 4 options in any given time slot. Usually they get less as the night goes on, because we don't, and so when I say, so people will go, but like, I think last year, like we all went as a family, and I think I don't remember, I might've had like the 11 or the midnight time slot. And then like, I brought the kids home. And so, people they'll go as long as they're able to go.
Sure.
But like in between, like I said, also there's dairy. So there'll be like tables of hot chocolate and cheesecake and ice cream. So that's the other thing. Like when I was a kid, I remember we used to go to services, and if you could make it to like services, we used to go to this learning. I don't remember any of the learning, but I knew if I could make it to midnight, that's when the ice cream came out.
Yeah.
So you go as long as you could, and you get your ice cream, and then and so you'll go and you'll have people, I mean, at various times in the night, different size crowds. Sometimes you'll have someone who like really was committed, and then they'll just be sleeping on the table. It was easier to do when I was 18 than it is to do now.
Sure. Right.
But
Right.
we will participate in at least some of the learning and like staying up late. I have gone all night. I have not always gone all night.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. So is that when you decided you wanted to be a rabbi? When you were like, there's ice cream in this gig, and then
I was like, yeah, there's ice cream in this. This is great.
See, for Gentile Protestant, it was the pizza parties. That's when
it's all about the food. Yeah. So Shavuot is like a little bit funny, because we'll have, like depending on how you do it, like you might stay up all night. Then we'll do the morning prayers. Usually we'll start at like 9. But they could do it, earlier. So like if you make it to 6:30, then like whoever is there will do the morning prayers, and you'll try to do like a quicker version of it. So maybe you go until like 8, and then you go home and you crash, and then you still have to have like a good lunch meal, but maybe that's at like 1:30 or 2,
Okay.
So
okay. And I'm also glad you've clarified the pronunciation there, Shavuot, because I was like, I know I'm not pronouncing this right.
Or if you want to do like the good Eastern European pronunciation is Shavuos.
Shavuos. Yeah, I wouldn't get that. Shavuot. I'll stick with that. Okay. So that's the Feast of Weeks. And it is remembering and celebrating the giving of the Torah. And again, as you've said, some of that, and I love but there are some definitely unique aspects to that. And the Friday evening all-nighter, that's very I love how that is worked into that. I mean,
well, you're
really
welcome.
cool.
You're welcome to come. It's going to be next week if you'd like to join us.
No, I like the concept of it far more than I think I would like the reality. I can't even make it through a movie without dozing off.
I think Sunday night is the first night next week of Shavuot.
Okay. All right. Well, remind me, and with very minimal expectation, you can remind me of that, and I'll see.
There'll be ice cream and cheesecake.
Well, and that might just talk me into it. And maybe I'll pursue rabbinical. No. All right. Then so then the next one is and I'm trying to remember, this is not connected. I mean, they are all connected, but this is not an immediately following, right? As we move to the Feast of Trumpets, or Rosh Hashanah.
Right.
Which is the Jewish New Year, and falls in the year. When does that fall? It's in the fall.
It's in the fall, yeah.
Okay. So tell us about the origins of Rosh Hashanah, or the Feast of Trumpets.
Yeah, so Rosh Hashanah is, as you said, it's the Jewish New Year, and it it's a matter of some debate, but for the most part, the rabbis agree that it marks the day that Adam was created.
Okay.
I think it's like just kind of a fascinating element of all of it, that we don't tie it to the first moment of creation, but actually to the day that humans were created. There's actually 4 New Years. The Bible talks about 4, or the rabbis talk about, because there's different times. The rabbis talk about, 4 New Years during the year. So one is the first of Nisan, which is the month when Passover happens. And so interestingly, like when the Bible talks about months, like it'll say on the first day of the 7th month.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't actually consider that to be the first month, which like in the English calendar, like January is the first month and then the new year.
Right.
So we do, so like it's the new year for, I think they say like the new year for kings. So if you were going to say like in the 5th year of the reign of King so-and-so,
okay,
then you count Nisan. So if somebody becomes king, you know, they might have been king for 3 months and then Nisan hits and now you're in the 2nd year of the king. So Nisan is like when you count kingships, king reigning, whatever we call that.
Okay.
Rosh Hashanah is the new year for being inscribed in the book of life, we'll say, and I'll explain more about that in a minute. Then there's a new year for trees, and I can't remember now what the 4th new year. I think there's a new year for how we count with plants, like how much, because like how much you reaped in a year that you then like donate to the temple. I think it's like something related to that we don't practice in modern day. Okay. But don't hold me to that last part. I might be saying that wrong. So Rosh Hashanah is considered to be the new year. So the origins is that we say it's the day that Adam was created. Fascinatingly, we believe that the day Adam was created is also the day that Adam sins, and also the day that he's ultimately forgiven by God. I mean, he's punished, but is forgiven. And so the tradition says that Rosh Hashanah is the day when all of creation is sort of presented before God for judgment. And judgment could mean, we think of judgment oftentimes as like, are you good or bad? But really when we say judgment, to a certain extent, we're like weighing someone's actions, but there's also a sense of like, what's going to happen in the coming year. And I always find this to be kind of a difficult concept in the sense that we want to think that those things are connected, but I think we've all lived in the world enough to know that people who do really great things still suffer calamities in their lives, and people who very openly sin still can win the lottery, you know. And so when we talk about judgment, I think we really think about it more in the sense of like, what's going to happen, and that includes the world. So how much rainfall is going to come down for the crops, where will there be natural disasters, you know, who's gonna get sick, who's gonna be healed, who's gonna die, who's gonna, you know. So there's this idea that that like our fate is written on the holiday of Rosh Hashanah. And so it is both like it's very much a celebratory day. We're celebrating the new year the way that we might celebrate, you know, January 1st. But there's also like a certain seriousness of the day. So we do have festive meals. We will eat a lot of ritually significant foods, and they're all supposed to be symbolic of the year that we want to have. So most famously, we dip an apple in honey for a sweet new year.
Yeah.
So we'll have a lot of sweet foods, but there's a lot of things, and they've evolved over the years. So there's like jokes in Hebrew, there's jokes in Yiddish, there's jokes in Aramaic, there's jokes in English. So like my family started doing, I'll do one of the English ones, like we would take a piece of lettuce, a piece of celery, and a raisin, and my dad would say, let us have a raisin celery. And like that's supposed to be right. So it's like they're all kind of jokes like that.
Dads are awesome. Every tradition, dads are awesome.
But there's like jokes in Aramaic. So like there's certain foods like, you know, in Aramaic, I can't remember them all off the top of my head, but we'll eat fish because we should like multiply and like fish.
Sure.
We'll some people will have, I say some people because I don't usually do this, although one time I went to a house where we'll have like a head of like an animal. So one time that was like the head of like a I don't even remember, it was like a goat, and it was intense. But some people will have a fish head. I'll get like the Scandinavian swimmers and I'll take the fish head, but we'll say we should be like the head and not like the tail. We'll eat pomegranate and we'll say our merit should be as numerous as the seeds of a pomegranate. So like we'll have a lot of symbolic foods that either the food seems like or the word of the food sounds like.
Okay.
And we'll kind of say things to be like, that our enemy should be struck down. So we'll kind of do those, but those are all really customs. Most of what Rosh Hashanah looks like in practice is similar to other feasts where we will, so we'll celebrate 2 days of it. There'll be a lot more prayers in synagogue for Rosh Hashanah. That one will definitely be like longer services than most of the other holidays. So whereas like Passover and Shavuot will be a slightly longer service, Rosh Hashanah will be an even longer service because in addition to all of the usual prayers that we'll do and extra prayers for the holiday, we'll also have like prayers of like supplication. So things that we request from God for the coming year. We go through a process of like asking for forgiveness. And so this is going to lead into Yom Kippur, and I'm trying not to jump ahead, but Rosh Hashanah is kind of a bookend with Yom Kippur.
Right.
And so we also have this belief that you can't ask for forgiveness of things that you do unless you admit to the things that you do. And so there's a series of prayers that we say communally. So we'll say so it's not even I, but we'll say like, we sinned and we lied and we cheated and we stole. And the idea is that there's a decent chance that in the past year I did, even if I can't think of what those were, right? Because like lying and stealing are things that don't have to mean like I robbed a bank, but it can mean lots of things. But also that like we as a community did that. Like even if I can't think of a time that I did that, and we actually will do where we'll actually kind of like take our arm and not heavily, but we'll sort of like hit the side of our chest as we say each one. So we'll see like we sinned, we lied for each one of those. And so we'll do those also over the course of the prayer service.
Okay. And that is I mean, is that kind of and I'm trying to remember if this is where I read that, like almost like a self-affliction, like I am guilty here, not as like it's painful, but like this is, just like
what you're doing, like it doesn't hurt, right? You're not supposed to like smack
but it
yourself,
is but it is a form of symbolizing like I have done this, I have caused this affliction and taking it on.
And and like of like deep supplication, right? Of like, yes, you're not just like saying it, I'm not just being like flippant and I'm saying like and you're actually supposed to kind of like when you say it, you stand up and you're actually supposed to be like a little hunched over, like you're not supposed to be like standing tall and brazen. You're supposed to be like the way that you would stand before, like if you were pleading, and if you were really saying like I did this really bad thing. So it's actually this like kind of fascinating day because it's not considered to be a sad day, but there is this kind of like seriousness, and it's supposed to really be a time of reflection. Like you're supposed to say, okay, the way you talk about like New Year's resolutions, right? Another year has gone by.
Sure.
Am I the person I want to be this year? Have I been the person I wanted to be last year? What did I screw up? What do I need to be working on better?
Yeah. That is that's really good. And I'm gonna do a little thing here because but except for I don't know if you wanted, I mean you did kind of mention some of the ways that you celebrate. You brought that in, but I was going to kind of do that so we could hit pause on this and move to the next week, which is because there is 10 days of kind of the days of repentance that lead up to the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. All right. So coming out of Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets, there are 10 days of we would call repentance, 10 days of reflection and remembering and owning the areas that we neglected. So it's kind of a culmination, as you talked about, not only looking forward to the new year and may the new year be good, but also the reflection of what we did well, but what we did poorly the year before. And that leads up to those 10 days, then lead up to the day of which this is the high holy day, I believe, at least it used to be, it still is the high holy day of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement.
Yeah. So the 10 days include Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So
Okay.
Rosh Hashanah would be day one. So actually there's 7 days in between, which some people have said like that gives you kind of like one day that like in between. So, if Rosh Hashanah is a I don't know, a Monday, Tuesday. So now you have, right. So that Wednesday is supposed to be like, what's the Wednesdays you want to have in the future? What's the Thursdays, right? So you kind of have like 1 week and then you get to Yom Kippur. So it's actually kind of easy to remember. So if Rosh Hashanah is a Monday, Tuesday, Yom Kippur will be the following week on Wednesday.
Okay.
So it's these 10 days total. And so we'll say as part of our prayers, on Rosh Hashanah, it is written, and on Yom Kippur, it is sealed. And so this idea that like your fate is written down, but you have the capacity to maybe change your fate. And so we say 3 things can change your fate. So I'll say it in Hebrew and then I'll translate. So we say teshuva, tefillah, utzedakah. So teshuva is repentance, and repentance has to mean, as we understand it, it's a confessing, it's an asking the person. And this is really important also for us. God does not forgive for sins that you do against someone else. So like if I hurt you, I can't go to God and be like, God, I'm really sorry I did that, because it's like God's like, well, that's between you and Trey. Like God's like, I don't step into that. Like God forgives for sins against God. God does not forgive against sins against other people. And so that's like a process of going to people and confessing what you did and asking for forgiveness.
Yeah.
Of, like we said, reflection. So we understand real tshuva, real repentance, as being put in the same situation again and choosing a different course of action. So not just saying like, sorry, I did that, but like actually doing the work to say, if I was put in that same position where, someone left their wallet out and it was super easy and there was money sticking out and I just grabbed it and put it in my pocket, right? Well, what do I need to do so that the next time I'm in that situation, I maybe I don't feel that temptation, or I feel the temptation, but I stop myself from doing it.
Which is, and I'm just kind of jumping in on that real quick, which is something I think Christians, the temptation is, I say the temptation that all sin is against God. We would probably echo David, against you and you only have I sinned. But I think that can be, and you and I have talked about different elements of this just in general, but I think where we can fail in that is that even if we say all of our sin is ultimately against God, we can fail to see how much we've sinned against another person and asking for their forgiveness and making that right in reconciliation there.
I think we would understand. Like, I mean, I do think that we would see like you sinned against God's creation and that also hurts God. But I still think like God would say like, okay, but then fix it, meaning like fix it against my creation, right?
Make recompense. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So like, I mean, like if as a parent you hurt my kid, I'm also going to be really mad at you for it. But like the way you're going to fix it with me is by fixing it with my kid, right? Like if I see that you've changed your behavior against my kid, then you and I could be good again. Yeah. Right. And God's kind of in the same. So yes, like I think we would totally agree that that's also a sin against God.
Sure.
But God's not going to intervene on that. Like God wants you to then like, okay, you stole from them, go make amends to them, give them the money back, like make it whole. And then come talk to me, and then you and I can do it again.
And the Torah has a few things on that.
Yeah, 1 or 2. Yeah. So we say teshuva, repentance, tefillah, prayer. So we have, that's why we said extra prayers and things like that, and tzedakah, charity. So we'll try to do a lot of those over the course of the 10 days of repentance. And then Yom Kippur is when we say it's sealed. And so that is, I said Passover is probably the most celebrated holiday. Most people probably would have family over for Passover and would celebrate the Seder. But if you never go to synagogue any other time of the year, you might go on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Excuse me. And so, and if you only go once a year, it's going to be on Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur, the Torah calls it like Shabbat Shabbaton, the Sabbath of Sabbaths. So we treat it like Shabbat. And so I mentioned before that for most of the holidays, all the same restrictions of Shabbat apply. So also on Rosh Hashanah, I wouldn't be using money or engaging in business, and we'll have these festive meals on but I mentioned that on holidays we do cook or carry. On Yom Kippur, we don't have cooking or caring. It's all the same rules of Shabbat, all the things that we don't do, but we don't have any festive meals. So it is a 25-hour fast day. We won't eat or drink. We don't wear leather shoes. We don't use creams. We don't, what am I forgetting? There's no marital intimacy. And there's a fifth thing that's escaping me right now. But the idea of it is that it's actually supposed to be, what's kind of interesting is that it sounds like it's really horrible, but what we're striving to do on Yom Kippur, it's one day a year when we strive to go beyond our physical bodies. Like in a ways, like we sort of are supposed to act, we act more like angels. And I don't mean that in the colloquial sense of like angelic or like really well behaved, but actually like there is a Jewish belief in angels. Angels are beings that serve God. They do not have free will. So they only can do what it is that they are told to do. And so there's a certain sense that like angels are the closest to God, that there's prayers that angels can say that humans can't say, but that God actually like, the angels are also limited because they don't have free will. So like praising God is only so great if like you didn't have any other choice to it, right? Like we strive to be more like angels. So some people will have the custom to wear all white. And so this whole idea is like, we're not focused on like our physical. So like, we're only feeding our souls that day. We're not, just something I've thought about like on Rosh Hashanah where like we have this like intense prayer, but then sometimes I'm like, oh man, services are going long and I told our guests to come at 1:30 for lunch, you know, like no one's coming for lunch. Like there's nothing else that is going on. So prayers will go exceedingly long. Again, there's like no place else for them to be. We will have an extra set. So on Shabbat, so during the week, sorry, let me back up. During the week, we will have 3 prayers a day, morning, afternoon, and evening. Shabbat will have 4 prayers, morning, afternoon, and evening. But between the morning and afternoon prayer, there's what's called a musaf. There's an extra. It literally means added prayer. Yom Kippur will have 5 prayers. So it's the longest one. And morning services can go, whereas usually we'll start at 9 and services could go, so on a Shabbat, services will start at 9 and maybe go until like 11:30 or 12. On Passover, services would start at 9 and maybe they could go until like 12:30. Rosh Hashanah, I mentioned, I think Rosh Hashanah we would start at 8:30 and we might go until like 1:30 or 2. Yom Kippur, we'd start at 8:30 and we'd go until like 3 or 4. And then and sometimes people will kind of take a nap, sometimes people will just stay. I mean, we might have like a 2 or 3 hour break, and then we continue with services. We also, as part of those services, will have like all the confession and things like that. What we will do on Yom Kippur in the Bible is it's a very intensive ritual of the high priest. So there's like the taking of 2 goats, and one goat is for Azazel, one goat gets sacrificed, like you push the goat off the cliff. There's like all of this like very strict ritual. The high priest would go into the temple, into the Holy of Holies, and say this ineffable name of God. We don't have any of those rituals anymore, but what we do is we kind of recreate it like through the service. So we will tell the story of that. And so Yom Kippur is also the day during the year where not everyone will do this, but oftentimes during our prayers, we will bow, but we'll bow at the waist. Yom Kippur is the day, so it'll talk about when the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies, people would fall on their face and they would like call out prayers. And so many of us will actually fully bow, where we'll get down on our knees and bend down to the floor, which is not something that we would typically do as part of prayers. So it's again, like it's a much more like, you know, and there's certain parts of prayers that we will only say on Yom Kippur. So one of our most famous prayers is the Shema, when we say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is your God, the Lord is one." And whenever we say that, and we say that as part of our daily prayers twice a day, And whenever we say it, we'll usually say that part out loud, and then we'll whisper. I'm trying to translate it. We'll say in Hebrew, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Blessed is the like the honored name Baruch Shem Kavod, of the kingdom, like forever and ever. Is sort of the response. I didn't do a good translation, sorry, but so we whisper it because we say that's what the angels say, and so on Yom Kippur, like we say that out loud.
Okay.
So there's like certain elements of all of that, and yeah, Yom Kippur is the only time we do have during the year fast days, like days that we commemorate sad occasions. And if a fast day ever falls out on Shabbat, we will fast on the Sunday afterwards. We will not fast on Shabbat. If Yom Kippur falls out on Shabbat, Yom Kippur supersedes Shabbat. So it's the only time any other holiday, Shabbat takes precedence. I mean, so you could have like Rosh Hashanah can also be Shabbat. We would still have all the ritual foods and things like that, but we won't do, I forgot to mention, sorry, on Rosh Hashanah, we also, you mentioned the Feast of Trumpets. We do blow a trumpet, and we won't blow the trumpet on Shabbat. So if Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat, we don't blow the trumpet, but we still say the Rosh Hashanah prayers, right? Like Shabbat. And I mentioned like on Rosh Hashanah, you're allowed to cook. On Shabbat, you're not allowed to cook. If Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat, there's no cooking. So it is Shabbat. If Yom Kippur falls out on Shabbat, Yom Kippur is the only time that we will kind of supersede Shabbat. So not so much superseding in that, like we will still not do all the things that we don't do on Shabbat, but whereas like there's like a command to have a feast on Shabbat, you don't do that if it's Yom Kippur.
That's fascinating. Yeah. So this is kind of this supersedes everything else. All other
and so
priorities.
The origins of it, I mean, I know I'm jumping around with your question, sorry.
That's okay.
It's not actually totally clear from the Bible, the origins of it. I think God just says, on this day is going to be the Day of Atonement, and all of that type of stuff. But we do trace the, we trace historically, if you count it out, we trace Yom Kippur to the day that God forgave the people for the sin of the golden calf.
Okay.
So we have the giving. So you kind of said like, are these connected, right? But we have like the sin of, right. So the people get the Torah. Moses goes up to Mount Sinai for 40 days. Then they count wrong, right? There's the sin of the golden calf. Moses, the people are punished. Moses kind of pleads from God on the people's behalf. He gets to go up the mountain again. And so basically, like we kind of keep quoting the story on Yom Kippur when God says to Moses, like, I have forgiven them according to your words. So we understand that this period so you can kind of count it from Shavuot, but that Yom Kippur is the day that God says, I have forgiven them.
Okay. That is, this is, I'm loving this. I don't know if, I hope you're enjoying explaining all of it, because I am really enjoying following along here. Okay. So then the final feast that is here is, and I had an opportunity, the Feast of Booths, and I had an opportunity to do this, but I wasn't able to. I think Noah hosted
he did
one and invited, and I am really sad that I did not get a chance to do that, because I would love to.
You'll come by in the fall.
All right. Deal.
Do it every year.
So the Feast of Booths, which is the final feast of, well, you wouldn't say the last feast of the year, the last feast that's commanded, but maybe it would be in the lunar year.
It depends on how, right? Depends on how you count it. We don't really count them as like first or last.
First or last. All right. So the final feast in our discussion will be the Feast of Booths, which is tied to, again, the Exodus story, but I believe,
Yeah, it is. So the Feast of Passover, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Booths are all connected. We would call them in Hebrew the Shalosh Regalim. They're the three pilgrimage festivals. So they're the three festivals where the people were commanded, if they could, to make pilgrimage to Jerusalem and to bring sacrifices at the temple. We practice it so we build a booth. So so really interestingly, this comes right after, it's 5 days after Yom Kippur. So it's on the 15th of the month. Yom Kippur is the 10th of the month. Rosh Hashanah is the 1st of the month, right? So we're kind of going along. And it is, actually there's 2 holidays that come in it. There's it's 7 days is the Feast of Booths, and then there's the 8th day of assembly. We call it Hebrew Shmini Atzeret, which is actually another holiday that gets added on, because like I said, we often will add days. We do 8 days of Sukkot and then a 9th day of this extra day. I mentioned that we do these extra days. I hope it's clear. Yom Kippur we still do only once, like 25-hour fast. That's it. Okay. So even as like, it's kind of interesting because we'll add a day for Rosh Hashanah and we'll add a day for Sukkot, but like Yom Kippur, we've all agreed like 1 day is enough. Right? But
you still do 25 hours.
Yeah, we still do 25 hours because we don't know when it starts and ends. Right. So I'm intentionally coming back to the origin at the end because I think it's the most interesting. So yes. The way that we will practice it is that we will build so it's called in Hebrew Sukkot. We build a sukkah, a booth, and we build it outdoors. And essentially we say that we live in it for those 7 or 8 days. When I say live in it, we don't really, we eat all of our meals in it. Some people will also sleep in it. But the idea is that like that's supposed to be where you live. So the booth itself, there's a lot of rules about how it's built. It has to have a set number. So it has to have a minimum of 3 walls. Usually it has 4 walls. You can talk about it if you have 5. And then the most important part of it is the top, what we call the schach. The schach has to be made from something that grew on the ground, but is no longer growing on the ground. So ours is made of like bamboo. I mean, you could take kind of branches and things like that. And it's supposed to be more shade than sun, but enough that if you looked through, you could still see the stars. It's not supposed to be protected. Like you're supposed to be vulnerable. So if it rains, like you're not allowed to like put a sheet over it to stop the rain or anything like that. So it's supposed to be that you're exposed to the elements. You cannot build it under any other cover. So you're supposed to be able to see the stars. So if you live in, like if you have a house that maybe has like a 2nd-story balcony sticking out, you can't build it under that. Like you got to move it. Every year, like we'll trim the trees because if a tree branch is sticking out over it, if it's blocking it too much, then that makes it no longer a kosher sukkah. You can use permanent walls. The top can't be permanent. The walls can be. And so sometimes like we've at different points in our life, like depending on what your structure is, like maybe one wall is your house and you could build it kind of sticking out from your house. The rabbis have some great discussions about like whether you can build a sukkah on the back of a camel, whether or not you can build it, which I would almost laugh about, except for the fact that like you will sometimes see people, like I've had friends who have built it like on the back of a pickup truck. And so the idea is like you're supposed to eat all your meals. So if you like go into work or something and you're not at home in your sukkah, like you drive your pickup truck, you know, you can go in and eat there. I'm trying to just think of it. Oh, so there's that. Then the other part of Sukkot is that we also, so again, there is like the, whereas Sukkot also is like a harvest festival, right? There's also the agricultural. So we take 4 species, and the Bible uses like really odd euphemisms. So there was a lot of debate until the rabbis kind of settled on what they think that they are. But we take what we call in Hebrew the lulav and etrog. So a lulav is 3 parts, and it's a palm in the middle, and then on one side is myrtle, and the other side is, oh, I can do it in Hebrew. I can't remember what it is in English. I can look this up. So it's the lulav, and then we say hadassim and aravot. And so, and then we take the etrog, which is a citron, which kind of looks like a lemon, but is more than that. And we take the 3 together. Willow. sorry. Okay. So it's myrtle and willow.
Okay.
And so we hold those together and we hold it with the etrog and we shake it in every direction. It's probably like one of the weirdest visual things that we do. And so we'll do that like every day. We'll take it, we'll make the blessing, and we'll shake it in all of the 6 directions. And then we'll do it during services, and then there'll be a point during services when we'll also like dance with it. Like they'll kind of like dance around together with it. We don't do that on Shabbat, so we'll only do it kind of during the rest of the week. And otherwise, again, like the holiday looks like what the other holidays. So we cease from doing work. We'll have our meals, we'll have guests over, but we'll do it in the sukkah instead of doing it in the house. So we'll kind of heat the food in the house and then we'll carry it outside. What I find most fascinating about Sukkot, there's a lot of conversations about how close Sukkot comes to Yom Kippur. They're not actually connected to each other, but we kind of see some connections, like this idea that on Yom Kippur, we try to achieve the highest level spiritual attainment that we possibly can. And that immediately after that, God commands us to like leave our house and go out into the world. So we sometimes make this connection of like, you actually can't live on that spiritual plane all the time. Like once a year, we strive to do that. I mean, I think about this a lot. Like Yom Kippur is supposed to be the day when we face our own mortality. And like what happens when you do that? But, people will sometimes say like, live every day like it's your last. But that's actually not a practical thing. If I lived every day like it's my last, I'd never go to the grocery store, right? Like at some point you have to do your laundry. Right. And so like Sukkot is supposed to, some people say that's supposed to be the reminder, right? So God says like, great, you did this like amazing thing on Yom Kippur. And now you think like that's the world you live in, like go outside into nature. Like that's actually the world, right? That's where I need you to be. So there's some connection to that that the rabbis see. What's really amazing about Sukkot is that, so you mentioned it's connected to the Exodus. What we say that it's because we lived in Sukkot while we were trekking through the desert. So these were, we would build booths and we would camp out, and then we'd decamp and we'd carry them and we'd travel on. What's amazing about that is that we did that for 40 years in the desert. So every other holiday, I said, this is the date. This is the date that we left Egypt. This is the date that we got the Torah. This is the date that Adam was created. This is the date that we were forgiven. On the 15th day of Tishrei, of the Hebrew month of Tishrei, nothing significant happened, right? Sukkot could be at any time of the year. And the rabbis talk about it being in the fall because if it was in the summer, no one would think it was interesting. It would just be a nice day. We do it when it gets a little bit chillier or whatever it is. But some of what I've read people say, I mean, what's kind of amazing about Sukkot, so there's discussions about why that date, it's not totally clear why that date, other than God said it. But whereas everything else celebrates like an anniversary, Sukkot represents the everyday. And what's interesting is that the Bible, not in Leviticus 23, but in Deuteronomy 16, when it repeats the festivals, it says about Sukkot, and so on all of them, we're commanded to rejoice on the holiday. And Sukkot, it says you have to rejoice on the holiday. And then it says, only about Sukkot, it says you should have nothing but joy. It has this extra commandment of joy. And so we actually call it, of all the holidays, so we call, you've referenced sometimes. So in our prayers, Rosh Hashanah, we call Yom Truah, the day of the trumpets. And Passover is Zman Cherutenu, the time of our freedom. And Sukkot is Zman Simchatenu, the time of our joy, which is sort of like an amazing thing to say. But I've read some people who said like, when you think about like your life, like, so we often will mark an anniversary, like the day of our wedding or the day of graduation. But in fact, like a marriage isn't the day you got married. A marriage is all of those like mundane, thousands of lunches you packed for your kids and chores and texting each other to say, what do you need from the grocery store, right? Like that's actually what makes up. And that's when we're commanded to find joy. Like what Sukkot actually commemorates is the people building camp and making lunch and cleaning the utensils and then picking up camp and marching again. And so there's something really incredible that for us, we call that Zman Simchatenu, that's the time of our joy. That's actually like the relationship with God. Like it's the faith in God that like we built these booths as we followed God through the desert. There's also a sense that God surrounded us with the clouds and protected us, but that like joy actually comes from the day-to-day trek through life.
That I love that. That's really, so that's in Deuteronomy, not in, and I'm trying to, I don't, but that just the command for, and be joyful, to find joy in that. Not the,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, so
that's
it's
really beautiful.
Deuteronomy 16, I think it's verse 15. Yeah, and it says, "You shall have nothing but joy."
Mm,
So we add
I
that
really
piece to
like
it.
that.
Yeah, so that's Sukkot, and then I mentioned there's actually another festival attached to it. So it's the 8th day of assembly, and that one there's really like God just kind of says like have one more day, and so it's sort of like we have this feast for 7 days. God just sort of says, and so there's actually kind of 4 holidays all in this month of Tishrei. We have Rosh Hashanah, we have Yom Kippur, we have Sukkot, and then we have the 8th day. And what we've done in modern times, so we have 7 days of living in booths. Like I said, we do an 8th day, but then we also have this 8th day holiday. So we kind of celebrate 2 holidays in one, where we think it could be the end of Sukkot, but it could be the beginning. So the first day we'll do this holiday called Shmini Atzeret, and usually that we just celebrate with just a festive meal. There's no kind of particular rituals or things like that. But then the second day outside of Israel, in Israel, these are all the same day. Um, we celebrate a holiday that's not in the Torah, but we call it, so it's really this holiday that's the 8th day of assembly that the Torah says, but we'll call it Simchat Torah, which is the celebration of the Torah. So we read through the Torah a portion every week on Shabbat, and we'll take 1 year to cycle through the Torah. And the way that it works out is that we will structure it so that we will finish the Torah basically. We will get to the second to last portion by Sukkot. Maybe it's the Shabbat of Sukkot. It might be right before Sukkot, depending on how if the festival falls out on Shabbat, we read a different portion, and so that kind of disrupts it. But so Simchat Torah is when we will read the very last portion of the Torah, the very end of Deuteronomy, and the very end of it. And then we will immediately read from the beginning of Genesis. So this idea that as soon as we stop, we immediately start all over again. And so it is a huge party, Simchat Torah. We basically, we almost treat it kind of like the way like a wedding would look, in that there's like, we will dance with the Torah. So we actually, what we'll do at our congregation is we'll dance with, so a Torah has to be kosher. It has to be proper. And so there's ways that a Torah could become improper. A Torah is made on parchment, on animal skin with ink, and the letters have to be a certain way. And over time, the ink can start to wear off. So if one letter becomes partially faded or eroded, then the Torah is no longer kosher. And there's ways that someone could fix it, but there's only so many times you could fix a Torah scroll. And so if a Torah scroll is, or it could be expensive. So if a Torah scroll is no longer kosher, we still treat it with respect. We won't read from it during the week. We'll read from a kosher Torah scroll. But in our congregation, we have 4 or 5 non-kosher Torah scrolls, and we'll take those out and we'll dance with them. So what'll happen in our congregation, so we will do separate dancing for men and women. That's our tradition. So the men will usually have, there's usually more men, so they'll usually have 3 scrolls. The women will have 2, and then there'll be drinks and snacks, and the drinks could include alcohol. And we'll take the Torah, and someone will like dance with it in the middle, and people will be like dancing around them, and we'll be singing. And so remember, it's on the holiday, so we don't play music. We don't use musical instruments on the holiday, and we won't play like a CD. So the music has to be all of us singing at the top of our voice. So we will be singing. And what's funny is that like sometimes like we've had it where we'll have like a list of songs that will go, but sometimes like someone will just decide to start a song, and so it'll be like a competition, like, can you like get your song to like take over, right? So we'll just dance for hours in the middle. So we'll do that at night, and we'll do it the next morning, kind of in the midst of services.
Yeah.
And then what we'll do during the day, so we'll read, it's the only time we read from the Torah at night, in my tradition. So we'll read from it at night, the end of Deuteronomy, and the beginning of Genesis. I believe we also do the beginning of Genesis. And then the next day, we'll do the end of Deuteronomy. And so what we'll do is there's usually on a holiday, when we read from the Torah, we can honor people. And so people will get called up for the reading from the Torah. It's called an aliyah. And so on Shabbat, we'll have 7 aliyot. On a holiday, there will be 5 aliyot. As a fun fact, on Yom Kippur, there's 6 aliyot, just because Yom Kippur always is like not quite Shabbat, not quite a regular holiday. And so what we'll do on Simchat Torah is we will, the very last aliyah is the beginning of Genesis. The second to last aliyah is the very end of Deuteronomy, and then the ones before that will be immediately before. And so usually those people will just get, their honor, and that's it. On Simchat Torah, anyone who wants an honor, who qualifies for one, will get it. And so we'll keep rereading that the almost to the last part of Deuteronomy until everyone. So in my congregation, where typically only men get aliyot, and when I say men, I mean like adult Jewish men. So kids don't usually get, and if someone's not Jewish, then they wouldn't usually get. We also will do a women's reading. So we'll separately go and we'll have women reading and we'll give women aliyot. And so we'll keep going as many times as it takes for everyone who wants to get this honor, to get the honor. And then they'll save one of the last honors. We'll do like really special tributes. So there is one, like I said, kids don't usually get an aliyah, but there'll be somebody, they'll call Kol HaNa'arim. They'll invite all the kids up. They'll take a talit, the prayer shawl, and they'll kind of hold it over the kids. And one of the men will be honored with getting the honor, but like sort of on behalf of all the kids. So usually that's like someone in the congregation that people, like that's an extra level of honor.
Sure.
And then really extra is there's what's called Chatan Torah. Chatan means groom. The person who gets the very end of Deuteronomy is considered to be a very high honor in the congregation. And then there's Chatan Breshit, the groom of Genesis. So the person who gets the beginning of the Torah, so whoever gets the end of the Torah in the beginning. So usually that might be someone who's been like just above and beyond in the community. You'll give those honors to. And so that'll often be like part of it was like someone will like announce like who got it, and it's like, sometimes people will like meet in advance to kind of talk about like who this year is going to be, the person who's kind of deserving of that this year.
Yeah.
There might even be like a little speech about that person or something. So that's Simchat Torah, and so that's like just like a big giant party for the Torah.
And that is the culmination of, that is the 8th day.
That's the 8th day. So it's actually not Sukkot. It's actually another holiday.
Oh, okay.
But it comes right at the end of Sukkot. So like right at the end of Sukkot goes into this 8th day holiday. And so on the 8th day, we will also celebrate, which the Torah doesn't say like, that's when you should finish. The Torah doesn't say anything about reading the Torah, but we've created the practice. So every week. And so that's when we will do it. And so then the Shabbat after that holiday will be when we read Genesis, when we start. So on that, we kind of finish and we will just say the first part of it, but we don't really like, we'll maybe do like the first, I don't even know if we do the whole first chapter. And then that following Shabbat, we would read the whole portion of the beginning of Genesis.
I love that element of celebrating the finish and the new beginning, that almost what comes after Torah, nothing more Torah, like
more Torah.
We go right back, we do it again. And that is fantastic. That's really cool.
This is like very much part of our tradition. So if you ever study Talmud, which is it's the oral tradition, but it's written down now, but people will study a tractate, one book of Talmud. And at the very end, if you finish a tractate of Talmud, traditionally what you say is Hadran alach, which is Aramaic, but it means I will return to you. So when you get to the end, you say, I'm coming back. You've never finished it.
Yeah. That's really cool. I like that. Okay. I have kept you longer than an hour. And my kid just walked in the door, and I'm very glad that he did not make noises, because I love the ending of that. This was really helpful for me to learn about this. And I'm really appreciative of you taking this time to do it. And I would
Have to.
and I would say for not preparing, other than I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.